We are back with your favorite show, the only show on the planet that discusses the important but often ignored subject of counterfeits. We are back here with the League of the Genuine, with me, your host, Fred Mwema. Every Friday, we have a conversation with a special guest, and today we are joined by yet another special guest to help give us more understanding, more perspective on the subject of counterfeits. So join me in welcoming Mr. Joseph Osieno. Mr. Joseph Osieno is, he says he's retired, but he looks fresh out of the woods. He's a retired gentleman. He's going to explain what he does. The little I know is that he's involved in media. He's been a commentator on many of the leading media outlets, the BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, even locally here in Uganda. But he is a Ugandan. Joseph, you are welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. You've substantially shocked me that as somebody who thought was a retired public service officer and who thought I had reasonable knowledge and information around matters charitable and matters that concern the citizens of this country and the citizens of Africa and indeed global citizenry. I did not know that I did not know enough about the subject of counterfeit and fakeness, but also that most of the things that I knew that I was very passionate about in terms of campaigns, I had underestimated their effect in being rooted and linked to the subject about which, you're afraid, I am absolutely excited and impressed that as an eminent lawyer, you're completely committed to. So yes, I am a retired local government officer, but absolutely an active politician.
Retired from where?
I worked as a local government officer in the United Kingdom for quite some time, and I left voluntarily because I wanted to commit myself and my time more to my native Africa and native Uganda, and also much more around political campaigns and seeking to cause change that would, in my opinion, impact on the livelihoods of our ordinary peoples here. In fact, many times, particularly part of the works that I did were in housing, community development, and contracts. Whenever I did excellent things, I always knew how little they would impact on Uganda. Sometimes I wish these quality issues, these regulatory issues, this push for excellence in customer services, how much I knew they actually did not exist in my native sense and home of originality. So I felt ashamed. So every other time I was very anxious to seek to return and to be able to do this at home. Of course, I stayed in UK as a refugee, a forced migrant against my will.
From which year?
From 1987. And I campaigned through legal, political, and diplomatic means until UPC won the right to return to multipartyism in Uganda in 2004 November. We defeated Museveni in his own courts. And so I returned to Uganda with Jim McKenna in 2005, and that was the end of my exile. And the more recent one has been on and off because it was circumstantial, cultural, and if you would say that perhaps in the last 10 years, I found myself in Europe relatively voluntarily, but circumstantially, because that was set to place my little beautiful daughter lives and studies that end. So when I look through this and I see people crossing the Mediterranean Sea, in many cases hooked around, it breaks my heart. But I know that's a subject
we shall talk about it. So did you become a British citizen or you are dual citizen?
No, I refused British citizenship that I had qualified for nearly 20 years ago, simply because as somebody who had been forced out of Uganda, I wanted to reclaim my Uganda and African identity first. And there was no circumstance, in my opinion, particularly knowing very well that the British foreign policy in a way contributed to my exile. I didn't want to do so. But I'm a permanent resident in Britain, and I will consider citizenship as a matter of convenience for paper. And normally I tell my friends in Britain, sometimes rather irritatingly, that yes, I did not want to have British citizenship. But I respect and appreciate the hospitality.
It is available.
And
It is
yes,
something
yes.
you can consider.
Indeed,
So,
yes.
so now that you returned to your motherland,
Yes.
Africa, Uganda, I want to give a report card. In your motherland, in Uganda, we have a huge problem of fakes everywhere, counterfeits everywhere. And you returned, if you like, on a political ticket. You came on the back of one of the old political parties, Uganda People's Congress.
The oldest, actually.
Yes, the oldest. So I will start navigating this discussion on counterfeits from the political angle. So do you think that when you got that victory of opening up the political space and allowing multi-partyism, do you think that the opening of the political space also opened up fakeness now, in the sense of politics? Did it open up the space for fake political parties? We no longer had a movement system, a monopoly, Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania or KANU. In this opening up, didn't it litter and bring fakes? And do we have fake political parties actually?
Do you know, as I said, I feel delivered, the religious guys would say delivered on this program today, because that is absolutely correct. That when I look back, we won the right to multipartyism, got re-registered, I returned home here in triumph, totally committed to coming and rejoining my fellow colleagues in Uganda House and across the country. Indeed, committed to working with our good friends in the Democratic Party as the traditional political party at the time, or any other political organization that had emerged to look genuine, not fake, as a political party, to work around real issues, not political lies and myths, to rebuild Uganda as a free and democratic and independent country, that one that would deliver for our peoples. Fast forward, I don't know, you talk about fake political parties, but I'm not quite sure even about fake leaders, or indeed fake political leaders. So I think this kind of idea of fakeness is very interesting. No, the political terrain in Uganda from 2006 today, I don't really know the difference between then and 1986 and 2006, the 20 years, except that you are allowed to put on your UPC t-shirt and claim to be UPC. So I know what you're trying to say. I'm not quite sure whether political parties in Uganda today can say that, rather ordinary citizens of Uganda can say today they freely are able to have a free competition of ideas, it is, because that's part of what you're trying to refer to, where we're able to engage on policy issues, when we're able to engage on questions of migration, where we're able to engage on questions of public health and access to health, quality health, and perhaps indeed quality education, where we're able to engage on
many of the other public
fundamental issues that affect and impact on the citizen as political, from a political leadership
point of view. So
view.
basically, what you have brought out is that this issue of counterfeits and fakeness has permeated all sections of our lives.
It hasn't permeated all sections of our lives. Don't spoil your own point. It is very much about all sections of our lives. And our fellow citizens, the citizens of the world, need to know that when we're discussing fakeness, and in particular when we're discussing counterfakeism, as it were, it is a concept which is not alien to anybody. You know, it impacts on our lives in every space. Part of the conversations I had with you when you kindly gave me a quick drink before starting this program, we're having conversations that reminded me that in my Tororo, when I was growing up 50 years ago, we didn't need fertilizers. Today we do. But now that we actually didn't need the fertilizers, it is even more serious that needing fertilizers, that some of the fertilizers that we get
fake.
are actually fake. That I had to inject our animals, cows, and some of the stuff that come from the vets, you are actually told by local friends that don't go to that one, go to the other. I reared chicken in the last 12 months, and I lost over 10 million on my pioneer project, and in many cases, it is partly because of fake medicine.
Yeah. Fake feeds.
Fake feeds are fake feeds. But at the same time, are these the animals that I'm going to eat, that are actually going to permeate into my children, that are going to affect our communities? Do our communities know? So the fakeness that you talked about, my brother, is a reality. It's as fake as the air, the air that we now breathe.
Now that fakeness, you agree, is a reality. I have seen in your profile, you describe yourself as an activist. So you'll be telling us you're an activist for what? But the specific question here is, you have not been doing an activism around pushing back these counterfeits. So are you an activist for or against counterfeits?
I reject that. I have I'm an activist for human and social and economic justice. And if I am, then it will be inclusive of this. Using my own Sunday column, I think as recent as 2 weeks ago, I was challenging institutions, and I was saying that we either invest in our institutions or we die. And one of them was that if the police service is not equipped, if they don't act professionally enough to be able to respond to series of crime, including a situation in which a young lady, a young woman is raped in a business at night in somewhere in the outskirts of Wakiso district, that it's got a direct impact on our society and our communities. Those are some of the things that which are involved. But maybe in answering your question, from political to social justice, to question of anti-slavery, which basically quite linked to this, question of immigration, question of human rights and democracy, to questions of our teachers have been very much on this, and the question of the budget reforms to make sure that we invest in much more in public services, to question of rigorous investigation of how government spends and disperses our taxes, and to questions of, in fact, how much government and how much we're able to invest, in new technology, while considering this is not only a young population, Uganda, but a very young population, Africa. But that Africa has got to compete, not anymore with Europe, but with Asia, which is actually a very big population and now has substantially grown. So, from that point of view, we either take all these other things together and run with it, or we are gone. No, I have not been an active campaigner. Consciously perhaps. Much more conscious, coordinated campaigner around this matter until the...
Will you wear the badge of an anti-counterfeit campaigner from today?
At the introduction of this interview, I said, and I call it a conversation more, because it's a conversation around our lives and livelihood. And anybody who watches this program and thinks it's a matter between the two of us and your screen, they're actually saying it wrong. This is a livelihood issue. That's why I call it a global security threat. And so it's a conversation that every sensible, responsible citizen of the world must take on. So for me, I am in, and I'm in formally and officially. That's structure.
Before we take a break.
Yes.
Because we know that counterfeits do not discriminate.
No.
They don't care whether you're UPC, you're DP, you're NRM.
Very interesting.
They hit you.
Yes.
We've been having cases of motor accidents. Buses, every weekend, people have been dying. And I'm sure they belong to whichever. So if this is a problem that unites all of us, irrespective of our political affiliation, religious affiliation, why is
or economic circumstances?
Or even, yes. So why is it that on the political side again, as we close, why is it that the politicians cannot agree on an antidote, on a solution? All of them cannot agree on a solution to fight this menace that attacks all of them. Why can't we get a political will, a political solution to fighting counterfeits?
Do they know it, actually? Because we may ask this to Mr. Museveni, who's been in charge for a rather long time. is the political leader of the ruling organization. The rest we've been saying elements of fakeness here. But if we then go ahead and talk about other political organizations, how many of the other political leaders actually genuinely know and appreciate this as an issue? And Mr. Museveni, less about him, but more because he runs a government. Most of our monies go to civil servants and researchers and others. And I'm sure people like you, when you knock on their doors, they should respond because they're in charge of the state from that point of view. But from UPC's perspective, as I said, we are the most, socially sensitive political party because we're consciously left-wing and progressive, as it were. From my perspective, it's sort of a commitment. But as you know, we're having internal issues on leadership, but this is resolved. And in the likely event, by the way, Fred, that the leadership of the party is resolved in the next several weeks or several months, in which I'm very likely to be at the forefront. I'll take this not only officially, but I've also committed myself, and I'm saying this on camera, that this is one of the few conversations that we must make it non-political. And so I am actually happy to have conversations with all the political leaders, a round table on this possibility, invite us to have a conversation on this thing.
On this issue.
So that we contextualize
Yes.
the counterfeit issue as a legal, as a political, as a criminal issue, as an economic issue, but also, as I said, a matter for national security, a matter for long-term human security.
We are in conversation here with Mr. Joseph Otieno, and we are going to take a break and return with our second segment for more conversation on the big subject of counterfeits. We are back with the second segment of this interesting conversation here with my senior colleague here, senior citizen, Mr. Joseph Otieno. We are having a discussion about counterfeits, politics, economics, and so on. Mr. Otieno, you happen to be, I've seen one of your interviews, and in one of your introductions you said, lastly, I'm an African. Now, I would like to keep the African identity there, but then relate it to the question of counterfeits. Counterfeits on this program represent a distortion of a true identity. Africans suffer a lot of distortion of their identity. The peoples, some live in denial, they don't want to identify themselves as Africans, they don't like their skin color. The media reportage on what Africa is and what it stands for is distorted and so on. Do you think that counterfeits have many different faces in Africa in terms of this identity and distortion, from whatever fulcrum perspective you want to give it?
It's very interesting. You are talking about politicians and fake news. And I was just thinking about the historical perspective of the African reality. And that is what most of your listeners and guests would, most of the audience would know and have heard about the story about the house slave, and as presented by our civil rights activists of those days, that they are actually African slaves who, if they're the ones in the house rather than the plantations, they also felt as if they've arrived with the masters. So they are now part of the family and unit and identity of the masters. And so that unfortunately seems to continue, that even today, part of the problems we face is that they are Africans who are basically Africans by definition, but their interests are elsewhere. And so whilst they are Africans,
their interests are elsewhere, but are they anti-African?
You cannot have an interest which is elsewhere, not African, and in many cases perhaps push an anti-African interest on behalf of anti-Africanism, or not be African by omission and not be anti-African, if you want to put it for you that way. So I don't want to be too harsh on people or that very particular concept, as it were. because it's not about an individual, but neither here nor there. But I can tell you that it gets worse when we have Africans who think their skin color, this is not African, and so they should bleach and look slightly a different lot, a different race. And I'm sure this is some of the things. Now, beyond that, we also have Africans who are very dark-skinned, but the African continent is the jungle, is the bush. And so we've got issues. It is possibly not surprising that some of those Africans and some of those concepts make net contribution to the African who wants to leave the African continent, to go elsewhere and think they're elsewhere, unless they're elsewhere, they're not themselves, they're not accomplished. So while people made trips to Europe, by force, as slaves, and while many would make these trips by force, economically, and is part of forced migration, there are people who then do so much more recently voluntarily. And that you link with people who go to Asia as new slaves. Some of those go because they've been swayed that they'll make a lot more money there economically, and so therefore by force, if they can't find jobs here and they think they can go and clean some Asian and get a few more, that, in my opinion, is still forced. But there are those who actually voluntarily leave to go. Those are, in my opinion, Africans who've got issues. Now, is it my responsibility as a politician? To an extent, by and large, yes. Is it the responsibility of people like yourselves who've got opportunity to have this kind of conversations, and particularly the broader media? Absolutely, yes.
So do you think this African identity demon or crisis that we have is contributing to the subculture of counterfeiting? Because if you have this identity crisis and you think of yourself as down-specced or downgraded or a slave, that means that when you go to the marketplace, you will feel that your entitlement is the lower version of everything.
And you want to seek the other,
You understand?
Yes.
So do you think that this identity crisis or demon that we have in our head as Africans is also contributing to our seeking?
It's not that I think it's an absolute fact.
Contributing to this faking. Yes. But why do we like the fakes?
Our identities, the identity question and self-confidence, and it's also a matter of political leadership, that while Dubai was a desert around the time I was being born, today is a miracle. And while Tororo used to roar as I was being born by a steam engine locomotive train coming to Kampala, and it was about to be electrified in 1989 as an electric train, and so therefore cleaner train and cleaner transport system. The rail network is dead. What are we talking about? As I said on my way from Tororo, here in Namambe, Kampala is choked with vehicles, vehicles, border borders and others, but because we don't have trains, while people are building underground transportation networks. Now, what are those? Those are questions of leadership. Those are questions of economics. Those are questions of some of our own awarenesses. The guys in border actually take it for granted, elements of ignorance. So we need to have this conversation. I can tell you, we need activism on counterfeitism about this, but to broaden the context, to say that including the question of walking to work, maybe we need to begin to make sure that we're able to say, let's walk to Kampala as part of an environmental walk to work, a cleanup, rather than
still with the question of the African, because this program serves to help Africans to keep safe, not to consume fakes, and we're dying in millions every year. Now, we are on the receiving end of racism, for example. And for us here, we think that racism is part and parcel of counterfeit culture in the global economy, in global trade. Why? Because we have a situation where Africa is a dumping ground for fake goods, substandard goods. And even in China, we have racism in the market, where you go and they will tell you by the skin color that the product you have to buy is copy. If you're European, they say you buy this one. So we are profiled already by our skin, even in the counterfeit question. So do you agree with that assessment that even this racism that we complain about as Africans, for as long as we shall embrace and identify with counterfeits, we shall wear and allow this badge of racism to be planted on us? Because you cannot demand for equal rights as a human being when for you, your conduct is always going down for the... Do you see a connection?
No,
racism and counterfeit?
Absolutely. And as I said, your earlier question basically quite answers that in the event that actually became much more conscious, much more aware, much more responsible, that our politics and policies drive the economics in such a manner that it's environmental and socially conscious and health and life conscious, and that we've got systems and regulations, laws and regulations that ensure mitigating circumstances under which some of these criminalities, the guy who goes to China and comes back knows they'll pass via Entebbe, no problem. But part of the other thing is that actually when the Chinese guy know that apart from giving this Muzungu guy going back with it to Belgium, it's very unlikely that these things will go via their airports. Anyway, they'll be cleared. So in many of these things about partly our authorities, in terms of the political leaders, institutions and structures and systems, but also ordinarily ourselves. So part of my problem is I don't want us to complain too much about the other. That's why we really must be able to own up this. And if anything,
we're part of the problem.
We are part of the problem. And I want to say this quickly. That's why I actually fundamentally believe that this initiative, which is really, really, really you, Fred's initiative, and this organization of yours, must not only take the lead here in Uganda, across this continent, but in my opinion, there is a space for this debate to take the center stage globally, so that it becomes an African initiative that actually becomes the solution to global counterfeit issues in the broader aspects of life, beyond the counterfeit issues about whether funny soap, funny oil, in this case, car tires. But I just want to say very quickly, and I don't know whether we have time for this, that I have a direct lived experience that I was wondering a meeting to go or not, whether or not to say it. I lost the mother of my daughter in a car accident. In fact, Formula 4, Dr. Bonyo, 6 years ago, near Gulu. These guys died in a hired vehicle. Allegedly, there's a burst tire. A possibility of the kind of things that we're trying to talk about. So I've got lived experience. So I've had to look after a little child who survived, but she survived narrowly. Of all the adults who had children, 4 children survived, but only 1 adult out of 5 survived in that accident. Yes. And so it is very practical, it's very particular, very real, and actually I thought I should say it on the record. So it is that bad.
So you have first-hand experience.
I've had first-hand experience.
Of a fake.
It is, and it's no joke. Including where then people go ahead and say, do we hire this or buy this because of its price and cost implications? But again, as I say, people rarely link this to the question of fakeness. And number 2, I have had a vehicle where I was sold a fake engine. I have also had a vehicle where I've been sold a fake turbo here at Kampala. Now, me by and large, I can afford to survive the next other day. What is the implication for an average Ugandan losing, in this case, possibly over 15 million shillings over 2-3?
Talk about you are a retiree. There are many people who have retired, got their pension, their package, and went and invested in poultry or invested in a truck, and the whole thing was decimated and destroyed, and a whole livelihood
my brother,
is taken away. But talking about, as we wind up this segment, you see, we have tried to codify and understand and break down what we think are the causes of counterfeiting here. So we have an acronym here called DACANI. We think there could be other driving factors for counterfeiting, buying and selling, but we have come up with DACANI. You see, differentiation, affordability, normancy, convenience. We never get to know the concealed dangers. We would like to aspire to be like you, you know, negligence. And what, in your view, is the big driver as we close this? 1 or 2 of them the biggest drivers of counterfeiting. The guy who sold you the engine, the fake engine, the guy who sold the tires that caused, loss of a life. What drives them?
I think your acronym counts all of them. I really don't have to overemphasize any. If they can buy into your acronym, they will. But that said, I think I'll give a political response. That the drive is basically the need. The drive is a sense of inferiority. I'm using the non-technical words. The drive is an absence of belonging. The drive, in my opinion, in many cases is broadly economical. But overall, I think the absence of institutions in this country and on this continent, in my opinion, matter. As I said earlier, somebody will deal in the counterfeit stuff, including what they call Nkrumah Road. That Nkrumah Road is the place for those counterfeit stuff.
The fake degrees.
And people laugh about it, and we talk about this. I've got a friend of mine on social media who's even nicknamed that in a joking way, of course, and people make fun of it. No, it would not be the case, as I said, in London, to the best of my knowledge. By and large, while these things are common and they are real in the streets of maybe South London, particular corner, it cannot be a matter of formality that an established business exists. Regulators will come in there, trading standards will come in for you. And by the way, I was telling some landlord the other day that there's an electrical fault on a particular place, and if something goes wrong, and it was actually for a neighbor, you know that it may not be that neighbor, it may be somebody else that might cause you the entirety of your apartment to go. People don't know the implications of these things, because they know if that happens, either you'll bribe the police or they bribe the judiciary, or nothing will happen. But if people know that the regulators will be there on you, but most importantly, the long arms of the law will be there for you, catch up with you, they will not do it. So it's, to me, about leadership.
Talk about regulation as we finish here. Recently, we investigated and successfully prosecuted.
Congratulations, by the way. Yeah, I had that.
Yes, a case for somebody who was caught selling counterfeit herbicides and pesticides. These were guys who were used to, on conviction, paying a small fine, but this guy is serving a 1-year jail time. And this has shocked the whole market. How you mean counterfeiting is a serious crime, somebody can go to jail. But talk about the regulators. One of the things we would like to introduce as well, if you are a landlord, you must do some KYC, know your tenant. And your tenant is selling on your premises that they rent, is selling counterfeit and fake products. I think as a landlord, you have some culpability. There's some way, if you rent your house to somebody and they commit murders and so on, as the landlord, you also go in for questioning. So I think the idea should be that we should not promote or give space to counterfeiters. We should not provide financing. Even as a bank, don't provide financing to somebody who is going to do a business that you cannot verify or check, because we in many ways are allowing counterfeit business to thrive because we are not doing the KYC. Your thoughts on that?
No, that's absolutely true and correct. In fact, in the landlord question, as part of your tenancy agreement, the requirement should be that
don't involve in criminal activity.
Not only that, it should be your accommodation for you rent this accommodation as a residential space, not a space to do business. So actually doing business technically in your private residential accommodation.
No, but even if it's for business, don't involve in illegal business.
No, of course, that's what I'm trying to say. And then when you get yourself involved in illegal business, the implications for you and indeed the implications for the landlord. So therefore, the landlord becomes the second phase of the longer arms of the law and the community. So I totally agree with you.
We need to have a break now and come back for the third and last segment of this conversation. We're back with the last segment of this interesting conversation, the League of the Genuine Conversation, here with my new friend, Mr. Joseph Otieno. He is a leading personality in media and, the economy, politics. Joseph, I have seen you. You're an adept writer. I mean, I like reading your articles.
Thank you.
You wrote an article on the 15th in the Monitor. I think I saw it there. And the title was, Africa Needs Tech and Innovation to Improve Output.
Mm-hmm.
After your engagement with the Anti-Counterfeit Network, would you make any changes to that article if you were to write it now, in light of your perception now of counterfeits as a problem?
I gave some thought to that, actually, interestingly. I would, but not substantially. I think I still believe that technology and innovation are net contributors to the possibilities of the future for this continent, except that the kind of innovations that we need, which is not only guided and regulated and well skilled, within a broader space where part of it is linked to the consciousness of the subject we are discussing, meaning counterfeitism and fakeness, would then require that any new technology that we think through the market is one that gives consideration for mitigation of fakeness.
Of fakeness. Why I'm saying this, Joseph, is
Yes.
because we know that the greatest hamper to technology transfer,
Yeah.
to technological development and innovation is faking.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. During the COVID outbreak, Uganda stood out for coming up with some innovative medication, Covidex. Okay? And people from Tanzania, from all the region,
Yes.
were saying, oh, we have a wonder drug, Covidex. But just see what that innovation faced. As soon as it came onto the market, fakes were reported, fake versions of Covidex.
Yes.
And in a flash, the opportunity to reap from this innovation was, was upside down. So I am thinking that, yes, we need technology, we need innovation, but all that will blow up in flames if this intellectual property in the technology and innovations is not supported by a stringent protection regime, which also must meet a market that is conscious and aware and respects the intellectual property. Because you cannot advance, in our view, if I develop something and it's just stolen, I receive no protection, and it's just faked. That was the context.
No, we're on the same page on this. My emphasis really is this, that part of the challenges facing the fight against counterfeitism is absence of structures and systems and institutions that work, absence of regulations, absence of possibly not really laws and rules and regulations,
Enforcement.
rules, but enforcement,
Yeah.
and therefore absence of conscious leadership. And then one of the other things again that is lacking is awareness of the citizenry, that someone like me who is substantially above average global activist, was until today is semi-illiterate when it comes to the depth of the subject, and how we're able to turn around some of this and how we're able to embed this. It is almost like I am saying that while we continue with innovations and technology, we should embed counterfeit, conscious anti-counterfeit awareness campaign, almost as you do it those days that you don't apply, in some countries, particularly in Europe, in UK. There was a time where you don't get a managerial job unless you pass a question on equality and diversity, something along those lines. So I'm trying to say that, therefore, indeed, that you cannot go through an innovative approach unless
without those
you pass the basics on health and safety, if it is anything to do with food, technology, or indeed clothing. In fact, almost every aspect of it, an element of health and safety implications, health and safety implications. Just as we normally say, cost implications, legal implications, health and safety implications, counterfeitism
Yeah.
considered. A list of that.
Has to be there.
Yeah.
Let me get closer to home now. You're in the media. You a leading correspondent, or you have been for a lot of the big media houses.
Yeah.
In these days, we have an expression of counterfeiting, of fakeness, in the form of fake news.
Yeah.
Okay, it is sometimes even official statements are fake.
Oh yeah.
They're part of the fake news. So this fake news that we have sometimes accompanies very popular statements like East African community. Now, as a Ugandan who has just faced a situation of the closure of our border with Rwanda, as a Ugandan who is trying to sell sugar or eggs to Kenya, this whole thing of the East African community might appear to be fake. Why an integration, economic integration, and we have such restrictions? Is the East African community fake?
Built on a false foundation. It's interesting.
The reality of it.
Indeed. Built on the current East African community is built on a fake foundation. It's interesting.
Fake foundation.
Yes.
The foundation is the 5 countries.
And I'm
6 countries now with DRC. The countries are real.
I'm actually giving you the context. That's absolutely true. 2 or 3 days ago, I was hosted by a major national media network, having conversations about the new parliament of the South African Legislative Assembly coming. And I remember coming back to the point I'm making, that the original East African community nations with Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, the foundations and founding principles and the founding parents were very conscious, very, very deliberate, very ideologically driven, ironically very Africanist in their perspective. Fast forward to where we are today, and that's the point I'm trying to make. What brings the current now 5 to 7 East African community nations together? Is there a common sense of identity, a common sense of purpose, a common sense of peoples? No, yes, we're all African, but for me, the African element in that is much more important than the geographical East African element called East African community, for which you have Tanzania, DR Congo and Rwanda as members of the new East African community. Their borders are closed. You would not think about a European Union.
Not just closed, but I think there's a war now.
There's actually
some rebels. Are those rebels M23? Are they promoting the East African community?
Plus so many others. I was going to say that and they're rebels. And then there is Uganda with soldiers in Congo. And then there is Uganda and Rwanda border that I don't know whether they can go through Katuna today and freely go to Kigali to have.
You know, I find that shocking.
Have the weekend.
You just imagine the European Union.
Yes.
Having troops from Belgium fighting Netherlands, and you have an active war, and we're talking of a community.
That is, yeah, that's the total fakeness that we're talking about. So it's real. So from
but it's a good concept.
No, the concept in principle is good, but it's not as good as the original African identity one.
Or the implementation is the issue.
And I've talked about the leadership, and that's why I actually said that the leaders of the East African community, all of them, I don't know any whom you can count and who can boast like Ochieno that I'm an African. So you can't actually be promoting the African identity where I'm seeking to claim my identity from all my brethren in Brazil and from my brethren in Haiti and all my brethren in South London. And at the same time, create the mess that we've created in DR Congo, and at the same time divide districts of Bukedi as if they're sweets and create almost identity districts. Those are the contradictions.
Those are the challenges.
Those are the contradictions.
But back to the subject here. East African community, one of the principles, free movement of peoples and goods. Do you think this East African community is actually allowing a lot of cross-border trade, and in the process allowing the proliferation of counterfeits across the region, seeing as especially we don't have a uniform East African approach to the issue of counterfeits? Kenya has the anti-counterfeit agency. Uganda
It's possibly the only one in other countries that has.
Tanzania has, I think, the fair competitions or something committee. Rwanda has something. We appear to be disjointed in our approach and engagement with the culture of counterfeiting. And yet we were one trading bloc, we were one community, So don't you think if the East African community does not put its act together up there, down here it's just going to increase the vice of counterfeiting? Goods will just be flying all over across the border.
It would, and it is, but it would possibly be misleading to suggest seemingly that the more broadly integrated, the more the counterfeitism. No, I think the absence of systems and structures, if all the nation states, and that's why again I argue that federation of nations normally happens through a convergence criteria, that beyond the three countries of Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, when countries like Rwanda were joining, they needed to have met a certain criteria.
A threshold.
And that must have been tested, including the democratic processes, So you meet them or you don't join. And then you see how...
So you join like and like.
Indeed. And you find nations struggling, Greece trying to struggle to say we're going to go through democratic process, and Turkey to join NATO, things like that. So you need to struggle and make sure that you meet the criteria before you're admitted. So if that was done, you would be meeting likes and likes, and so therefore this issue would not apply. So it's not the nations, but actually the breakdown or absence of the institutional structures in there. At the end of the day, if it was like and like, even if it's an entire continent, you know that what is going to land in Abuja, Nigeria, is going to be the same thing. You know that what is going to be manufactured in Lilongwe, in Malawi, is going to meet the same standards of what is expected and will be consumed in Kinshasa. Just like, of course, you know that every time, therefore, a young lady emerges from Kinshasa on board an aircraft into Nairobi, knows that I'm going there as an African, I don't have to lighten my skin.
As we leave the topic of East African community, I know that at the top of the East African community is the summit of heads of state. You think now that this issue of counterfeiting, which is common to all the East African countries, must make it to the agenda of the summit as one of those important issues that must be addressed to liberate us economically, politically, socially. It must go to the summit. And therefore we must have a unified approach to counterfeits in East Africa.
I don't not only think so, I know so, and I'm saying it must happen. It's a matter of urgency that this matter is made much more prominent on all the national media in Uganda, that this matter becomes a matter of concern for the entirety of the East African community. My opinion particularly also is that because the African personality is the most marginalized, the most at risk identity as a nation, as a people, as Africans, this counterfeit issue is most affecting us. And so therefore, it must be something that the African Union must take on. And for me, at any time you call me and wherever I will be able to respond, if only even to carry a bag to one of those summits to go and have a conversation around many of these other things and to create networks. And I will use my spaces wherever it is that part of my campaign is also counterfeitism.
Fantastic. Now, talk about your spaces that you can use. You have spaces in the media. We have a particular concern here about the media's role in promoting counterfeiting unintendedly. We have a lot on the media, on the TV stations that you appear. There is a lot of promotion of brands through advertisement. Millions of dollars are spent every year on these campaigns. And what we have realized is that every time a particular brand is advertising on your platforms a genuine product, they unintendedly also promote the fake product. Why? Because the fake product looks like the genuine product, sold in the same place. You cannot tell the difference in price. Most cases, the outlet is the same. So don't you think that the media houses must play a bigger role in stopping, and the brands, in stopping this promotion of the sale and buying of counterfeits? And what do you think should be done?
I think it's overdue. But in part because of the level of ignorance. As I say, that I live a slightly much more literate person than I joined this program myself. So the editors and media owners and media houses, not only in this country but around the continent, around the world, should be encouraged to do that. But I also think that maybe I think we need to have a mini disclaimer that particularly every major media agency, and we could do this, could become part of a global campaign from the global networks, that we don't want to give them free adverts on this network. That every time there is a major advert globally, that there must be a disclaimer about anti-counterfeitism.
But don't you think that, apart from the disclaimer, don't you think that brands, because I can tell
Yes,
you,
yes.
I'm active in this space,
Yes.
a lot of brands quietly fight counterfeits. Quietly, they'll do an operation to clean out fake sanitary pads, an operation to clean out fake lubricants, but they do it quietly.
Then so what? Yeah.
And then Otieno here will not know that there has been an operation to get fake oil engine or lubricants on the market, and he will go and drive right into the very place where the operation has been taking place and buy the same product.
So that becomes counterproductive.
And they don't know. So don't you think that there must be an obligation for disclosure that we have a counterfeit problem? We are having this water. We have just arrested 200 cartons in this part of the town. This is a warning. Please do not take product batch number this or this consignment or in this place. Don't you think this information should go along with the information on promoting the product?
I am actually quite surprised that brand leaders globally, and if they need advice and conversation, this again, you and I should be able to be part of that. And as I said, I'll grant my little time to that. That's precisely what they need to do. As a common sense, and if anything, it's part of their continued adverts, because they spend resources on these things anyway. So it's self-defeating if they don't. I'm actually quite surprised that the public relations people have never given due thought and consideration.
You know what the argument is?
No.
The argument is that, you see, if you disclose to the public that your product has a counterfeit problem, somebody was faking it,
so they will link it to the brand.
The consumers will run away from this product. We think otherwise. We think that if I am a consumer, and because there's a perception out there that many of these brands they only care about profit and so on.
And maybe that should be our public response to them.
Yes, so
that if that's the case, that we as consumer, including Uchenna as a consumer,
yes,
if you're a brand that we know you're doing these other things and then you conceal information from me, not only is it that you're driving me away from me, but maybe there's a legal obligation from your perspective to make sure that I get informed, and I'll involve my nation state.
Of course, that is the issue of product liability.
Yeah.
That's why you see in the developed countries, you have product recalls. They will recall the Samsung, the vehicle. Here we don't have any product recall because the sense of responsibility for the brand there to the consumer is higher. We are saying that it is a sign of care for the well-being and welfare of the consumer. If you are a brand and you care enough, not just for the profit, but you care enough about the safety and well-being of your consumer to inform them of a danger. If your product is being faked, there is no harm in you coming up and owning up. I think the consumer will feel that you actually care about them. And they will actually come and support you, and maybe even will provide a front line to explain, oh, we saw this product here and so on. You turn the consumer into your front line to fight the faker, and these will be the consumers who will be denying the faker the market. But if you do the operation quietly and the consumer doesn't know, he will continue buying the fake and hurting your market share and affecting your intellectual property, your IP and your trademark and everything. So I think it's something that needs sensitization.
Yes.
The sensitization is not just on the part of the consumer, but also on the part of the brand.
On the brand.
And not only is it a responsibility, but I think it is also supporting the cause for human existence.
But maybe also we need to bring in the nation states, the governments here, to say that the brands operating in particular nation states must have responsibility and obligation to declare and make this. And if these things come to the public domain or indeed to the domain of the state, there are actually repercussions.
Okay, now we're going to close, but in the beginning you made a comment about something important, and since this program is watched across the continent, the issue of the forced migration, forced
yes.
migration across the Mediterranean. Every day we're seeing the Italian patrols and so on arresting Africans crossing. Don't you actually think in there, this problem is actually caused by the prevalence of counterfeits on the African continent that are killing industry, that are killing agriculture, that are not model employers? These Africans who are crossing are being chased actually by counterfeits. That the solution might actually be, can we have a good regime that safeguards African production, African economies against counterfeits? We shall not have a migration. Do you agree?
If the agricultural sector were viable, by and large, there is this word sexy in context, that it is one which, including young people, would find nice
Jobs,
and interesting,
yes.
to be able to do, actually, not only to find jobs, but to find nice and posh and cool to be able to do. Like these days, and I'm saying this for your program very deliberately, it's actually rather cool. I made this observation that I made a tour of northern Uganda, and I told my driver that, you know what, have you just realized that the biggest proportion of women who ride motorbikes were actually in Kitgum? And now these are post-conflict areas, and you find it very interesting, but meaning giving hope. And I saw it in Gulu and I saw it in Kitgum, but I noted it relative to the rest of the other parts of the country. But some people might say actually because many of the other women are driving cars, but possibly not. It's an element of lifestyle, and it's actually healthy. So I actually think that if people found it cool that they can actually work on oxen plows and run farms, and that this is put on your gumboots rather than actually pretending to be dressing rather well along Acacia Avenue, but going to come back with just about managing your monthly rent at the end of the month, they'll return there and they will not be seeking those abroad spaces. But if governments were able to put these things on check, and so therefore to collect taxes, which of course the implication for counterfeits is that governments lose huge amounts in public revenues. If they're able to gather more of those monies and create not only opportunities, but also if part of this means that the mainstream guys who go through genuine innovation are able to create, and come up with new innovations and new developments, and so therefore create jobs and opportunities for young people. And innovation is also about thinking solutions, as I said, from taking from a desert to those miracles, that we're able to do these things in Africa. We would mitigate our people crossing and the seas to basically go and do rather dirty jobs for which many of them are turned into slaves. But really back into Africa. We are the richest continent. We are the second largest continent, and richest in really virtually sort of everything. So there's no reason why it cannot be the case that we may be able to put a stop on this thing. But if you look deep in it, the biggest continent suffering counterfeit is Africa. And yet Africa is the continent that if we're able to deal with these ones, we should be the ones who should be the biggest beneficiaries. And which continent is one which is exporting by force, and in many cases people running away, looking for jobs, which jobs don't usually even exist, many of those places. It's Africa. So by and large, I think we need to wake up. So we need political leadership on this, across political parties and political divides, political leadership at national levels, and I think we need a global continental, national leadership, national continental leadership on this. Maybe retired leaders like Comrade Chikwetes, Comrade Mbeki is now slightly an older hand, is slightly struggling. Maybe we need some of these big eminent African names to come on board this conversation and help us waken the African continent as a giant, reclaiming originality rather than fakeness.
Joseph, I would have loved to continue this conversation and talk, but production says we need to stop. We cannot end without asking you to give a message this evening to our viewers from your newfound discovery about counterfeits and how we should look at it and deal with it.
I know that I have taken slightly longer than average because I accept that I am delivered today about this subject, which I thought I knew. The only thing I can actually say to the viewers, and you all out there, the political leaders, the economic leaders, community leaders, and you, the consumer, including you, brand leaders, if you're on this program, to say that, look, this subject is a subject that affects and endangers the future and possibilities of humanity. So therefore, we should take it not only very seriously, but I think also that just like I've become the activist amongst many others on this subject, I'm encouraging you, those other activists, to join and come on board with me and Fred to become part of this campaign, so that we're able to mainstream our communities, mainstream our lives, and to go for things much more regional, much more indigenous, and much more real, much more authentic than the fakeness that is actually threatening humanity. I thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thank you for the audience, as always, for being a part of this great conversation, the discussion on the League of the Genuine about counterfeits. We have had a wide discussion here with an interesting senior citizen. He says he's retired. We think he's now just begun a new campaign now against counterfeits, Mr. Joseph Ochieno. He is a commentator on many issues, political, economics. He is in the media. He's been a correspondent for a lot of the big TVs, if you like, on many African affair issues. And we hope you have been able to learn one or two things from this conversation, but you've heard him. It is the responsibility of each and every one of us to participate, to contribute as a human being, to provide a front line for the fight against counterfeits. We believe here that an informed consumer is an empowered consumer to fight counterfeits. We would like to sign off by thanking you for always watching, sharing, and putting that reminder notification. If you're new here, this is the only show that discusses the subject of counterfeits. So until next Friday, 8 p.m., we need to sign off by asking you not to be fake, buy and sell genuine always.